Welcome to the Omni Sports Podcast. Featuring your host, Bobby Labita.
Hello and welcome in everyone to another episode of the Omni Sports Podcast. I'm your host Bobby Labita, back for week 27 action. And this week concluded the first round of the playoffs, which I'm excited to talk about. As we're recording May 6th at 12:02 a.m., so you might as well call it May 5th, we're going to get you all of the recaps up until this point. So if you're hearing at a later date and I have different information, some of this may be out of date. And because we're really focusing on the playoff series, this particular episode will be much shorter than last one. Last one was actually the longest in Omni. No, we're not cutting this Omni Sports NBA podcast history, but our baseball podcast was longer, and you should check out that inaugural episode as we have a second episode coming out later this week. But before we get into all of that, we have to get into our sponsor of this week. And again, if you're unfamiliar with this podcast, which rude, but second off is that we have a fake sponsor until one day we might have a real sponsor. And our fake sponsor for today is taking your ball and going home, because that's what happened to 8 teams in the past 10 days. And we're going to talk about that in our episode that's not going to have different sections. We're not doing that. This will just be this intro, a long talking section, and a conclusion. We're unhinged this episode.
Storylines of the week.
All right, to talk about actual basketball, we're going to start with the west side of the NBA bracket, and then we will go to the east side of the NBA bracket. I'm going to go through 2 different series, and then I'm going to go to how those 2 teams from those winners of those series will face each other and my predictions. And I will put out actual predictions. The last couple episodes with the playoffs, I've kind of been like, this is what I think, but I'm gonna put my foot in the cement. No more doing this in sand. Again, this is an unhinged podcast. So starting in the West with your 1 seed, the Thunder. They were against the Pelicans, and they absolutely clapped the Pelicans in a 4-0 sweep. Last episode, I said I thought this would end up being a sweep, and I was correct. Granted, it was 3-0 at the time, so I had a lot of information to make that assumption. But the Pelicans never looked competitive this series. They were out without Zion. With the outset of this series happening, Brandon Ingram has not gotten his contract for next year, which was allowed for the team to opt in. The team has not done so we could lead to believe that maybe he might become a free agent, or he's going to try to get a new deal with the Pelicans. But unfortunately, this is not how the Pelicans wanted to end their season. I think there's a lot of talent there. I think if you can trade Brandon Ingram for some other piece and then complement that piece with Zion, I think that'd be good. I think Brandon Ingram is a good asset in the NBA, so I do think you can get something for him, and hopefully other teams will be interested. The issue for the Pelicans is that Brandon Ingram, when the team is not doing so well, does not always have the best attitude. But the Thunder just look good. Any doubters that there were for at least this series had really nothing to say, because the Thunder were in control the whole time. All of their role players look good. And this is probably the series that I feel like the second least watched series, just because it was so one-sided. Next, and so the Thunder advanced to the second, the conference semifinals, and then we'll be facing the Mavericks. And the Mavericks played the Clippers in an intense 6-game series that ended up with Dallas winning. A lot of the games were really close. And they had a lot of twists and turns. If you were a Clippers or Mavs fan, go to a doctor, because it's been stressful the last little bit. Pretty much when you look at this series, I think the prevailing storyline will be that Kawhi Leonard was absent the entire series. And I mean, the Clippers are left with a bunch of question marks, right? They have Paul George, who was great some games and not so good others. You had James Harden, who was fairly consistent and at least helpful when his shot wasn't going down. And then you have this roster of role players around them that are solid. You also have Russell Westbrook coming off the bench, who it was good in the first game of the series, but was pretty notably bad from games 2 to 6. He the the Mavericks weren't defending him. He had a really low field goal percentage, and the kind of the takeaway from this is, unfortunately for Russell Westbrook and James Harden, there's been this notion that they're chokers in the playoffs, and I don't know if this playoffs did much to change that. However, if you watch the games, that's maybe for Russell Westbrook a little bit, but I didn't feel that way for James Harden. He was actually doing a lot of really good things in a lot of the games. Maybe the most exciting game and scary game, depending who you are, was when the Clippers won their second game of the series. They were up 31 on the Mavs, and the Mavs came back all the way to tie it. But then the Clippers actually ended up winning this game. I think what you see from the Mavericks side, if you're looking forward, is Luka was a little banged up at the beginning of the series. He had a knee problem more in the middle of the series. And the last game, he looked a little looser, looked a little more with it. He looked like he was stumbling a little less, and he was doing better on defense. And Luka Doncic's defense has actually been doing better this playoff series. And I think that's one thing to note from the Mavericks, is their defense was actually very good and has been for a little bit, and we wouldn't think that with the Mavericks. But you have big players like PJ Washington, Derek Lively was a contributor, and then you had Kyrie, who wanted to play really good defense, and even talked about it, that he was more interested in playing good defense this series than playing good offense. But he played good offense. It was I think the vision for the Mavs that they had for this team last year when they traded for Kyrie, and last year we were like, oh, this is not going to work. No, it's working. And I think this is a reminder for us as basketball fans to give things time. Things don't always gel the first year. LeBron, Bosh, and Wade didn't win their first championship their first year. And then, the rest is history. And I think the thing that we can look at this with the Mavs is, like, I think the Mavs Thunder series, kind of previewing it, is going to be really a fun series. You got border state rivals, right? Oklahoma and Dallas. I think that if I had to guess, I feel like people are going to hate my West predictions. I think this series is going to go 6 games, and I think the Mavericks are going to pull it out. And this is why I think this. I think the Thunder are really good, and I think they're good enough to win a couple games on these Mavs, and they're really gelling. But I think that the Mavs just have more of that experience that's going to be necessary in the playoffs. And I know we've talked about this as a critique for the Thunder, but I've always kind of said it. I wasn't so much worried about it for the first round, because I thought that Thunder would beat whoever the 8th seed was. But I was worried about this more for the second round, because this is where the nitty gritty gets, right? Luka has been to a Western Conference Finals. Kyrie has made a game-winning shot in an NBA Finals, right? So you have a lot of experience there. And you have the Thunder, who are really good and I think will put up a good fight. But I still think it's not their time just yet. And I could be wrong, and I'll be happily wrong. I think the West, I think all these series are really exciting. And I think this one is especially exciting because there's a lot of offensive firepower in this series. And I think it'll be really fun to watch. I think it'll be fast paced, and it'll be very, I think there will be very surgical and precision, right? There's going to be a lot of Now, on to the next series, we have the Timberwolves, and we already talked about this last time, so I won't really go into it too much, but the Timberwolves swept the Suns in a 4-0, and it was very decisive. The Timberwolves were very ahead, I think, in almost all the games. Only one game was particularly close, and we saw the resurgence of Ant, and they are facing and have faced one game, which we'll talk about in a second, the Nuggets. The Nuggets faced the Lakers, and the Nuggets ended up winning the series 4-1. If you watch the series, it was, as a Lakers fan, I can tell you it's very painful. The Lakers actually, I've never seen this stat before for one series. The Lakers led more minutes in this series than the Nuggets did, but the Nuggets led the most important minute, which is the very last one, or the very last second. I think the Lakers are just, there was no one really stepping up for that third role. And I won't talk about this too much just because I talked about it a little bit last time. But I think the Lakers are just missing a piece. I don't know exactly what that piece is. It could be a big that allows AD to not have to play center so much. I mean, I think we have some big guys, but we're not playing them together. And then we need a consistent 3-point shooter because D'Lo can be good at three, can get super hot, but he's not consistent. Same with Austin Reeves. Taurean Prince like had his moment earlier in the season where I felt like he was consistent from like the corner three, but he hasn't really been. So if I'm the Lakers, I have a lot of question marks, and the Lakers have a lot more question marks because, and if I had a news and notes section this week, this would have been the only one, which is why I'm not doing it. The Lakers have parted ways with Darvin Ham. He was fired on this past Friday, and rumors were circling that he would be fired by the end of the weekend, and he didn't even make it to the weekend. I had a whole episode released on my YouTube channel where I really dive deep into the Darvin Ham firing, what I think it means for the Lakers. But the too long didn't read version is I think that the Lakers ownership and general management does deserve more blame than they are getting. I think almost all the blame is put on Darvin Ham. However, I think Darvin, despite the success of the team, if you watch the team, it was a frustrating experience because you'd be like, why is that guy out there? Shouldn't these players play together? Why are we doing this? And it felt like the Lakers started games strong, but couldn't adjust, which suggests that there was a good game plan, but then a lack of coaching. And I think Darvin Ham's biggest flaws were he would not use timeouts to stop runs, and then sometimes he would use timeouts on silly things. And so I think the kind of technical aspects you don't think about being a coach, like doing reviews and timeouts, he really struggled with in very high pressure situation moments. Sometimes it felt more like he was a spectator watching the game than a coach. That's how it felt as a Lakers fan, which was not fun. Now, these two teams are the only two teams that have played already. They played this past Saturday, and the Timberwolves beat the Nuggets, and so now they're up 1-0. I think the Timberwolves match up really well against the Nuggets, because if I'm playing the Nuggets, the thing I'm scared about is they are big, right? You have Aaron Gordon, you have Michael Porter Jr., you have Jokic, you got some big dudes, and then you have the Timberwolves who are even bigger. So I think the Timberwolves match up really well. The Timberwolves play really good defense, and I think that will be more of a impedance on Jokic than there has been in previous series. I will say I thought the Lakers did an okay-ish job containing Jokic. It didn't feel like he dominated the series, which is funny because he's still probably one of the best players in the whole first round, but it didn't feel like how it sometimes does with Jokic, which I think for the Timberwolves, right, maybe there's some blood in the water. The Timberwolves are hungry. I talked about in a recent podcast with my friend Rashi called Unsung Heroes, which you should check out the link down below. But the big thing that we both talked about when we filmed this last Monday was how good the Timberwolves are and how they're our unsung heroes. She talked about how the team was her unsung hero, and I talked about how Anthony Edwards was my unsung hero, and absolutely crushing it. He's killing it. I think he's showing he's going to be the next big superstar of this league. I really believe that. I'm on this hype train. And I think the Timberwolves, you have Rudy Gobert playing, Defensive Player of the Year defense. Cat, who's just matured a lot, knows when to play defense, knows when it's time to be play offense. We have that working. You have Mike Conley winning Teammate of the Year for the Timberwolves. Every year, players vote for their favorite teammates, and this is his second time winning it. And I think it's a significant award because it's coming directly from the players themselves. My prediction for this series is the same as the other series. I think it's going to go 6 games, and I think the upset is going to happen. So that means I think the Timberwolves will play the Mavs in the conference finals. And I stand by that. I think the Timberwolves, this will sound dumb, but if you've watched sports long enough, sometimes it just feels like the moment. For a very deep reference, in 2004, when the Red Sox, who had not won a World Series in 80 years, were against their rivals, the Yankees, and they were down 3-0 in the playoff series, and then the Red Sox became the first team ever to go down 3-0 and then beat their rivals, you just knew that the Red Sox were going to win the World Series that year. You just felt it in the air. And I feel, not necessarily the Timberwolves are going to win it all, but I feel feel like they're gonna make the finals. That's my prediction. I think the Timberwolves are gonna make the finals. I stand by it. This take might be cold, but it's okay because I physically am hot because I have to turn my AC off whenever I record, or you hear all that noise, and I run hot. And speaking of hot, let's talk about the Heat, who were not so hot against their series against the Celtics. Now we're going to the East. The Celtics play the Heat. It was a 4-1 for the Celtics. I think without Jimmy Butler, the Heat didn't stand much of a chance. Jimmy Butler, after said in an interview that, if I was playing, there'd be no chance. Boston would be sitting at home, or if I played New York, they'd be sitting at home. Yeah, I mean, who do they have? Josh Hart, which there's playful banter there. It's not actual banter, or I think so. It seemed playful. Listen, after this week with all the diss tracks that are going around, I don't know what's playful anymore, but I thought it was playful. So the Celtics, I think, were just a very clear tier above the Heat. I think the Heat pulled out a upset because of how good Eric Spoelstra is. However, and I know this sounds dumb to say after a 4-1 series, if I'm the Celtics and I've won 64 games and I'm against a team that's the A seed and they don't have their best player, I don't think there's an excuse not to sweep. Like, if I were a Celtics fan, I don't know if I'd be happy with that, right? I think back to, and I know this is not the best example, but I think back to when the Lakers were really good, right? I think when I'm young, like 2000, 1999, like if we weren't sweeping people, I was like, what's going wrong? What are we doing wrong, right? And that's maybe the wrong, right? Maybe that's too high of expectations, but for a team like the Celtics, you really kind of expect, I don't know. I thought they would sweep. However, the Celtics are going to be playing the Cavaliers, and we're going to talk about that next series. The Cavs played the Magic. This was the only series that went 7 games, much to my surprise. But there were only 2 sweeps in the first round, which I think is pretty low. I remember some years there being like 5, So I think that also speaks to the talent level is going up in the NBA, and there's more equal talent across, the bands of the NBA. So the Cavs played the Magic, and they won in 7 games. The Cavs were down by 18 in the last game of Game 7, and at home they're able to pull out the upset. Donovan Mitchell did a lot of work to carry them, and my kind of feeling from the series is I said I thought the Magic would win, and after they went down 2-0, that looked really dumb, but then they were up 3-2, and they looked good. So I think the Magic are similarly to the Lakers, but very different situation. But I think the Magic are one player away, or maybe 2. But I think they're very close. They play really good defense. Paolo is gonna be a dude in this league. He's so good. I think the Magic have a lot of great players. And honestly, like the Magic, like this was close. Franz Wagner went like 1 of 15 in this game, and that's probably the difference maker. And that's not to critique Franz, right? His teammate Paolo said, hey, we wouldn't have gotten here without him, and that is true. But that's just how sometimes it goes, right? The Warriors should have lost to the Rockets a few, 5 or 6 years ago, but then the Rockets missed 27 threes in a row, and what are you going to do, right? And so that's one of crazy happenstance things that happens when a game goes 7, or a series goes 7, you never know what's going to happen. The Cavs play the Celtics, and I think the Celtics are going to win. I think it's going to be a 4-1 series. I think the Cavs just don't have the firepower to match the Celtics. The Cavs, they have Donovan Mitchell, and Garland is a good point guard, but there's really not enough there for me to be like, oh my God, unless both of them are playing well, right? And that's concerning when you really have to have 2 players play well, kind of in that way, right? Donovan, has gotten 50-point games in the playoffs before. He had to do a lot. It might be too much against the Celtics. Now, the things that the Cavs can, I don't know, look forward to is the right term, but the Celtics are currently out without Kristaps Porzingis, who looks like he won't be back this series, but could potentially come back if it's later in the postseason. I also forgot to mention news and notes kind of detail for the Mavs. Matt Kleber, he hurt his AC joint and might be out for the rest of the playoffs. It was unfortunate because it was a big hustle play where he got hurt. But back to the Eastern Conference. So I think the Celtics will beat the Cavs in 5 games. That's my prediction. At this point, with how good the teams are, I don't think there's going to be any sweeps. It just could be wrong. But if there were to be a sweep, I think it would be this series. Next, We had the Pacers who played the Bucks. The Pacers won the series 4-2. And they pulled out the upset. A lot of this was largely because the Bucks never had Giannis his entire series, and they also missed Dame for a game. And I think what you saw here is that the Bucks, with their depleted roster due to the fact they gave up assets for Dame, and I think losing Drew Holiday is a big deal for this team. I think it was just not enough. Honestly, the Bucks, I think, put up a valiant effort going, winning 4-2, but it just kind of, and in game 6, the tables turned, and you just knew it was towards the end. It was like the Bucks were done. Dame, I feel like, had a chance to really. He also has a moniker for. Well, he doesn't have a moniker for choking in the playoffs, but he's been criticized for not advancing farther in the playoffs with his Blazers teams. Which, to his credit, those Blazers teams were only in the playoffs because of him. But I felt like this could have been a series for his legacy, right? And I'm worried that I'm being very careful in the way I'm going to say this. I'm really worried that in 2 decades, we will not remember Dame enough, because I think there's a lot of players, and if you followed sports long enough, there's a lot of players you're like, oh, that dude was so good, or that girl was so good, that person was so good, whoever they were so good. But if they don't have those like championships or those MVP moments, they kind of get lost to the sands of time. Dame will always have that game 7 game winner, which is one of the coldest shots in NBA history. But I'm worried besides that, will we just remember him as a dude who was loyal to the Blazers and went to the Bucks and nothing happened? I don't know, but I'm worried that could happen. This is the first time I've ever had that worry about Dame in his career, because, it's starting to get to be time. But for the Pacers, what does this mean? So the Pacers, I don't know if the Pacers win if the Bucks are at full strength. I do think it's still a competitive series. But I think that the Pacers ultimately were able to outpace the Bucks, and you had some really nice plays, different contributors from Miles Turner. I think Siakam is a very interesting addition for the Pacers. Halliburton is having more of those moments, and I think for a team like the Pacers, just getting that first series, like, if I'm a Pacers fan, I think this series is a success, right? Hopefully it means you go further, right, if you're a Pacers fan, but I think this is a success, and take this really as a learning opportunity to build on for next year. Because I think the Pacers are going to lose. And who do I think the Pacers are going to lose to? Well, the Pacers facing the winner of the Knicks-Sixers series, which went 6 games, and this was the actual most stressful series of this playoffs. I honestly, not being dramatic, I am. This is one of the best first round series of my lifetime. Every game had drama, had contention. There was some visceral hatred from the players and the fans. I don't love the hatred part, but I love the passion part. And there was a lot of passion in this series. Knicks fans actually went to Philadelphia and kind of raided the first 76ers games, which pissed off a lot of the Sixers players. I think you see here a really interesting series because you have 2 teams that I think are well coached. I think Nick Nurse is a good coach. I think Thibodeau, for all of his criticism for what he does to his players in terms of the minutes, which Jalen Brunson averaged 46 minutes in the last 4 games of the series, which doesn't sound like a real stat, but it is. And I think Jalen Brunson was a huge difference maker in this series. He beat Bernard King's record. He scored 47 points in one of the games. And I think Jalen Brunson is the right dude. He's the right leader. And I've been saying this. I think Julius Randle's a very talented player. I think if I'm the Knicks, try to trade him to a team, get some assets to build around Jalen Brunson, because I think he's that great. I think he's that awesome. And ultimately what the series kind of looked like is you had Joel Embiid coming back from injury, and he just didn't look himself. He played good enough to keep the series afloat for the Sixers to win some games. Tyrese Maxey had a couple of games, but he wasn't there all the time, but he had some really good moments. This series felt like some really crazy impressive moments by some players, and then the same player would do something really dumb the next second. I think this series is also going to be marred by sort of the villainization of Joel Embiid. I talked about this in my podcast with Rashi, that for me, Joel Embiid is my current villain of this playoffs, if I had to give a villain. I won't repeat too much what I said in that podcast, but the main too long didn't read is that Joel Embiid in the past has been criticized for flopping and playing recklessly, and this has led to in this particular series, there was a reckless play. Mitch Robinson got hurt. There's another play where he very unnecessarily kind of elbowed and shouldered Jalen Brunson, and Jalen Brunson very earnestly was like, dude, what was that for? And it was the most heated I've seen Jalen Brunson. To be fair, it was not that heated, but it was pretty heated, and it kind of put a little bit of a stench on this series for me. I think going into this, I was kind of a neutral fan. My girlfriend loves Jalen Brunson. He was on my fantasy team last year, so I have an affinity for him. But I'm not necessarily rooting for the Knicks all the time, right? And I'm not necessarily rooting for the Sixers. And I found myself by the end of the series really rooting for the Knicks, and that was a lot of it was in spite of Joel Embiid, who was playing, in my opinion, recklessly. I don't think he was playing dirty, but you can look up right now and find a bunch of dirty compilation clips on YouTube and on Instagram of his playing. I think he plays recklessly in a way that can hurt others, and I think you can say that's dirty, but I think he needs to kind of change his philosophy. He foul baits so much, and part of foul baiting is falling, right? Is ending up on the ground. And I think that he does that a little more than necessary. And Mitchell Robinson was able to come back, which is good. And so the Knicks play the Pacers. I think the Knicks will win this series. I think it'll be similar to the Celtics series, where I have the winning team winning in 5 games. Now, this can change because I think the Pacers are really good at pace. Very fitting name. And I think with the Knicks, my concern with the Knicks is because they're so deep in their roster. And actually the inverse. They never go deep with their roster. Their players play so deep into games, is what I meant to say. That I'm worried that when you have a team like the Pacers who can play so fast, that the Knicks players might get tired. I felt this way sometimes during the Sixers series, where the Knicks players, I felt were just oh God, right, in the fourth quarter. Also, shout out to Buddy Hield, who randomly had an amazing game for the Sixers, and I think has been forgotten in that trade earlier in the season. But shout out to Buddy Hield for having a really good game. But unfortunately, it was not enough for the Sixers, and the Knicks won. So Knicks play the Pacers. So ultimately, I think the Celtics will play the Knicks in the conference semifinals, and I think the Mavs will play the Timberwolves. Those are my picks. I'm locking them in. I'm not gonna go back and re-edit this with some AI in the future to stay the right answer. I just know it's gonna be right. And if not, we haven't had a Bobby as a dum-dum in a while, and it might be time. I hope not, but also it might be. Thank you all for watching another episode of the Omnisports NBA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Labita. I'm just going to vamp about what's going on in the Omnisports universe. So if you're interested, please join our Discord down below. I want to have some watch parties as we get closer to the conference finals, and even definitely in the finals. I want to have some people we can watch games, we can watch in our own place, but chat on Discord, something good like that. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a review. It helps people know about the show. And if you like us on YouTube, please feel free to like, comment, tell us what your predictions are for this postseason, because I'd be really interested to know if other people are seeing things the way that I do. On the horizon, you can expect a baseball podcast coming out soon this weekend, so please pay attention because the baseball season, we're in May, and I just went to a Dodger game. It was so much fun. That didn't really have much to do with anything, but it was just super cool. So as we're looking forward in the Omnisports universe, please subscribe to our Omnisports America channel and our Omnisports International channel. Well, soon I'll be posting more Australian sports content. A random niche I found myself in online, but that's why we love the internet. It puts us in niches we didn't even know existed. And kind of in the long horizon distance, as we get closer to the Olympics, I may be doing more Olympic coverage just so that people can know what's going on. Very fortunately, my summer break, and I have a very small summer break as a teacher because I direct summer school at my high school. The Summer Olympics and me on break are at the same time, so it feels like fate. Also, I'm hoping, I don't know, I haven't told her this, but if you know my now fiance, tell her that we should co-host a WNBA podcast together, because the WNBA season's starting. Watch preseason games. This is the most coverage the WNBA's ever got. This feels like a really good moment to talk about it, but also expand basketball for everyone, right? Because everyone deserves to be a basketball fan. Everyone deserves to enjoy the sport that we all love. I mean, you love it so much, you're listening to this random person who you may or may not know vamp about sports. So, again, thank you, and have a wonderful week.